amateur writers misunderstand the difference between omniscient narration and close third person. Even if you think you understand the difference, listen up. Because if you think you're writing one but are actually writing the other, you'll confuse your reader, lose their trust, and end up having to rewrite every scene.
I feel like she's lying to me. I feel like she's lying to me to bait me into listening to the rest of the video. Like, she expects me to believe the following. Firstly, when I make a POV error in a scene, it is so serious that I have to rewrite the whole thing. 2, I made this error in every single scene in the book. 3, readers, but not writers like me apparently, know the intricacies of how POV works. And if I don't get it right, they'll distrust me, instead of continuing to read while a little confused, which is what I think the worst case scenario is.
I'm not trying to sound alarmist.
Yes, you are. You're making me panic about having to rewrite my entire book so that I'll stay, even though you don't have anything useful to explain to me. The way I've seen fiction writing authorities, meaning editors, coaches, and experienced authors, talking about the issue of third-person POV is a little strange. We have third-person limited rotating POV, omniscient narration, and head-hopping, which are halal, and haram, respectively. The first is functionally the same as first-person narrative, where you switch POVs every chapter. Third-person omniscient is an eye of God type of situation where the narrator has access to all the information, meaning you can write from everybody's POV at once. And head-hopping is when you switch POVs too suddenly. But what is too suddenly? And why is it okay to switch POVs only at chapter markers? And why the heck should I care? To be honest, I haven't seen a satisfying answer to any of these questions yet. Take this example from the Midnight Editors. Aisha weighed her options. Fine, we'll go. She didn't notice Kai's relief. He'd been sure she'd say no. So apparently we're in Aisha's head, and the knowledge that Kai wasn't sure that she'd say no is jarring, because she shouldn't know that. And the fact that we know that she didn't notice his relief means that she wouldn't deduce that he was expecting to disappoint him. And here it's 100% the case that we learned about Aisha's inner workings, and we also learned information that she could have not possibly known. Omniscient, which is when you have access to all the information, is acceptable, but head-hopping, which is when you have access to all the POVs but you're mainly focused on one per scene, is an amateurish mistake. And if you don't want your readers to think you're an amateur, you'd better hire me to edit your manuscript. It's $200, and I'll edit your manuscript and make sure that you're not head-hopping. Sorry, I let the mask slip a bit. The distinction between omniscient and head-hopping that I just described specifically, that of consistency, is one that I made up myself, because not enough educational creators properly define the difference between the two. Let me read you another example, also from the Midnight Editors. Strap in, it's confusing. The villagers whispered of the dragon, yet none guessed that the young Leo felt only boredom, not fear. Even the mayor, polishing useless metals, mistook the hush for respect. Thoughts? Pause me if you need. I know you won't pause me. The sentence definitely feels bad to read, supposedly like head-hopping because it's so bloated, but that isn't necessarily because we know we're taking in multiple POVs. Technically, merely describing a crowd's beliefs is omniscient POV because it requires reading multiple people's minds simultaneously. It's also difficult to latch on a main character subject in the sentence about dragons or whatever. It is the villagers who are mentioned first. It could be Leo, who's the only named character, or it could be the mayor, who's the only one actually doing something. In reality, the sentence is supposed to be third-person omniscient. If we compare this sentence to the first one, though, the content of both is similar. These quotes are useless without the context that Aisha is the POV character. They also contradict the Midnight author's later claim that head-hopping is confusing, which is unlike omniscient, not confusing, as the villager dragon mayor sentence blob is a lot harder on the noggin than Kai was relieved. Why aren't we getting an example where head-hopping really is jarring and confusing? I can imagine such a case easily. Imagine Katniss Everdeen.
Yes, I'm writing Hunger Games fanfiction now.
Separated from her loved ones, thrust into a frightening new world, rolling into the capital, and she meets the dreadful President Snow. All she knows is his legendary status as an evil dictator and his present physical appearance, which she might find intimidating. And she's prepared to fight him indirectly. The reader sees how the sight of Snow is affecting her, and that builds stakes. They believe that this guy's dangerous, that Katniss might be in real danger now if he knew what she was thinking. Then, we flip to his POV and get to hear him thinking about how Katniss's pink forehead reminds him of the lovely salmon fillet he had for dinner last night. That, of course, is fucking stupid. This is a situation where we need the mystery, the suspense, to keep reading the damn story. These editors might call my error head hopping, but that's not what I think the fundamental issue is. It's a stakes problem. Let me switch subjects of inquiry to give you guys an easier example. So, imagine we enlightened hobbyist writers could move on from talking about Mary Sue's instead of the real problems, like conflictless stories and the challenge of writing a strong young woman. What if we had buzzwords that actually named the many faces of the prism Mary Sue? For example, we had a word for the self-insert, we had a word for the overly perfect protagonist, we had a word for, the plot being overly contrived, etc. When we discuss Mary Sue as adult enlightened writers, we're not really enhancing the technical skills of a mature writer. And for a mature writer, we're not teaching them how to think like a good writer. We're teaching them how to evaluate their work on a really superficial level. Not so long ago, I was downloading quizzes to check if my OCs were Mary Sue's, and instead of answering any tough questions about the story they were in, I just made superficial changes to their bios, like making their eyes the same color instead of heterochromatic. Similarly, teaching writers that head-hopping is bad might remove some unsavory bits, but it also forces them more of a standard, median writing style without actually improving anything. Sometimes, less is more. If so-called writing coaches and bloggers called out the POV shift to President Snow in my Hunger Games fanfiction not as head-hopping, but as me sabotaging the tension, things would be a lot simpler. We would be able to teach new writers about the fundamental qualities of narrative. You can prevent the problems that head-hopping causes by explaining to writers that usually it's better for the reader not to know things that the POV character doesn't know because we like to maximize tension. Perhaps writing coaches feel the need to capture the complexity of the craft by going over many ways that writing can go right or wrong. Instead of going over a fundamental like stakes over and over and over again with different examples and those different lessons, we have to invent little terms that don't make sense to those outside our club and tell noobs that if they make these mistakes, their writing will suck. If we weren't hyper-focused on these little things, we could teach young writers to think big picture, which is needed for any good story. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe these educational creators aren't actually trying to educate you. They're just trying to assert their power over strangers on the internet by introducing them to niche terms that don't really mean much of anything. So I can hear some of your brains saying, Richard, you're such a complainer. Why don't you just say something positive? Why don't you give a solution to all this negativity? Alright, I will grace you. I don't think anybody should be making or watching videos about writing that center around buzzwords. Instead, we should focus on important fundamentals like structure and conflict, as well as utile topics like where to find feedback on your work, how to ask for and take criticism, how to publish your work, how to budget for publishing, and etc. If we want to talk about the writing do's and don'ts, educators should either frame their takes as opinions, not facts, or sufficiently justify the consequences of what we should expect to see following when committing a writing sin. For example, I can say that it's a pet peeve of mine when authors include foreign words in their texts because it requires the publisher to add a footnote or the reader to put the book down and Google the word's meaning. Of course, there's nothing actually wrong with including foreign words in your writing, fiction or nonfiction, just as there's nothing actually wrong with describing the thoughts and feelings of more than one character at a time. But This way, my audience knows what the consequence of their decision to do the thing that annoys me is. I emphasize that this consequence has to be proportionate and realistic. When Alyssa says,
confuse your reader, lose their trust, and end up having to rewrite every scene,
I don't believe her. Especially because she concedes that there are beloved classical books that include head hopping. It's just a lie. Like, I don't know how else to say this. If you're saying something that you know is not true, if you're saying if your book has head hopping, you need to rewrite it, but you're also saying, yeah, I know, some of you guys in the comments are gonna say that X classical book has head hopping in it. It's a lie.